guys, sorry that live stream isn't working tonight, but I'm just going to record this offline and you guys can watch it later. So tonight we're talking about how to determine a bunch of different things. So we're going to talk about some probabilities, some confidence intervals, regressions, inverses, even, odd, blah, 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 blah. You can see the whole list there. Again, the whole written out key to this is on my teacher site, so if that's something you want to look for, go there, go to the determine live stream and take a look. But we're going to go through questions. They are in a random order because we want to make sure we're looking at mixed up questions. And if you have any questions while you're watching this later, feel free to send me a message. So let's start with something that we did sort of recently. So looking at number 1, the results of simulating tossing a coin 10 times, recording the number of heads, and repeating is shown in the graph. Based on the result, which statement is false? Now, if we're looking at something being flipped, right, a coin being flipped, we're going to assume this is a fair coin. So if I'm flipping a coin 10 times, then 5 heads occurring most often makes sense, right? If you flip a coin 10 times, 5 occurs most often, that's okay. That is what makes sense, and that does agree with the theoretical probability of half of your applications or half of your trials having that result. Now, B says 8 heads is unusual as it falls outside the middle 95% of the data. Well, that one's a little hard to see, so let's come back to that, okay? Obtaining 3 heads or fewer occurred 28% of the time. So 3 heads or fewer, that would be all of these trial runs. So let's count those up. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 14 out of 50, which in fact is 28. So C is okay. And then 7 is not unusual as it falls within the middle 95%. So B and C both require that we find where that middle 95% is. So let's think about this. If I want to know where the middle 95% is, I'm actually going to approach this a little bit more exact than I normally would. Let's figure out how many data points 5% of this 50 should be. So thinking about this, if I want 5% of 50, that would be 2.5 data points. So the middle 95% should be the rest of them. 2.5 are the ones that are sort of outlying. So looking at this and thinking about, okay, well, let's cross out the outermost 2.5 or 3. So that one's definitely on the outer. These are definitely on the outer. And so within that, this is my middle 95%-ish. Because we see that the outer 5% are these 2.5 or 3 values. So looking at this, if this is my middle 95%, 7 is within that. So 7 is not unusual, so that's true. And 8 is unusual. Well, 8 is still within that 95%, so that's B. Now, there's other ways you could do that. You could say, okay, well, this is 2 out of 50, right? And that would be 4% that's higher than this. And so that tells me that the 8 is within 95% confidence interval because you would only have 2.5% on either side. So again, lots of different ways to do that, but what we're looking at is that idea of your confidence interval. Okay, next one. So determine the value of sine theta. We're given the standard position and where it occurs. So I know that the terminal side of the angle passes through -4, 3. So I'm going to draw myself a little triangle. I know that that's -4. I know that that's 3. Now remember here you've got A, S, T, C. In this second quadrant over here, sine should be positive. So I know that sine theta should be greater than 0. Now, well, let's think about this as a triangle. So if I find the sides of my triangle, I could do 3 squared plus 4 squared equals C squared. C would equal 5. So the hypotenuse there is 5. And so then to find sine of theta, I'm going to need to do opposite over hypotenuse. Remember, theta is the part of the bow tie, the angle that's part of, let me draw in the bow tie really quick, your bow tie, right? And so sine of theta is going to be the opposite, which is 3, over the hypotenuse, which is 5. Now the only thing to consider there is it positive or negative? We already said it would be positive, so final answer is 3/5. All right, next one. Describe how a controlled experiment can be created to examine the effect of using awesome oil in a car. Now, anytime that you see controlled experiment, you should be thinking, okay, that means I need a control group, right? I need some kind of control. So here I want to control as many variables, and the only thing that I want to be different is the type of oil used. So what I would say here is two groups, and it'd be great if we had of the same type of car, right? One group uses awesome oil, one does not, right? So that takes care of the fact that I need a control group, but I want to make sure that I am so that takes care of the fact that I need a control group, but I want to make sure that I'm controlling for everything else, right? That I'm not having too many variables here. So same type of car. And then what I would do is I would track the cars, right? Or measure the performance, because we need to know, that we're measuring something after driving on the same course or track or whatever roads, but we need to be measuring them, against the same situation. So they definitely need to be the same type of car and they should be on the same type of road. Okay, next question. We're going to actually skip to number 5. So Joey has a credit card that has a 19.2% annual interest rate compounded monthly. She owes a total balance of $B after M months, and I've got this table. What interval of time is her average rate of change the greatest? Average rate of change should make you think slope, right? So I'm determining when the slope would be the greatest, and so I'm just going to find the slope between these intervals. So the slope between 10 and 60, so do your change in y minus your change in x, and that comes out to be about 28.398. Now I'm going to do the same thing between 19 and 69. And again, change in y over change in x, that comes out to be about 32.76. Now let's do the same thing. Let's go from month 36 to month 72. Change in y over change in x, that comes out to be about 37.916 repeating. And then lastly, from month 60 to month 73, and that's going to be about 45.7. Again, remember I'm doing change in y over change in x, or y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. And so which has my largest rate of change? It would be that one. All right, now for the next one, it says for this function, find f inverse. So f inverse tells me to switch my x and y. So x equals y minus 3 cubed plus 1. Let's switch our x and our y here. So I'm going to solve for y. So subtract 1 cubed. Now take a cubed root of both sides. Remember, with a cubed root, you don't need a plus or minus because you only need that with an even index root. And then to get y alone, you're going to add 3 to both sides. So x minus 1 plus 3 outside of that. And remember to change your actual value or actual function name back to inverse. So x minus 1 plus 3. Okay, this next one's a trig graph, and it's asking me to determine amplitude, frequency, period, and midline. We're going to take out horizontal shift here because that's not something that we need to work with just yet. So remember that when you have y equals a cos bx plus c, that your a value is your amplitude, your b value is the frequency, and the c value is the midline. So your amplitude here, which is the distance from the center to the top, will be 3. And I know that's a negative 3, but remember amplitude's a height, so that should be 3. The frequency is the b value, so that is pi over 3. The period, remember, is 2 pi over the frequency, which is 2 pi times 3 over pi, and the pi's cancel, so that's just 6. Remember, keep, change, flip. And then the midline is y equals 7. And remember that you need y equals there because it's a line. Okay, let's look at the next one. So again, we're finding an inverse here. So let's switch our x and y. So x equals log base 3 of y. Now I need to solve for y. And so the only way to get it out of a log is to change to exponential form. So I'm going to ask myself first, okay, is the log isolated? Which it is here. I just have the log, the base, and then the argument, which is the thing inside of it, the y. So in that case, I can convert this. So logs are exponents, so what power of 3 equals y? In other words, 3 to the x equals y, and boom, I'm done. That would be my inverse. Okay, next one, determine a recursive formula for this sequence. So 18, 9, 4.5. Recursive, remember, we need two things. We need a first term, and then we need to know what the pattern is for the nth term. So here my first term is 18. And then let's look at the pattern. So I am every time dividing by 2 or multiplying by a half. And remember, if you ever weren't sure, to check if it's geometric, which this one is, you could do the second divided by the first. So here, my pattern is to multiply by 1/2 whatever the term before it is, which we would say is a at minus 1. Right? To find the next term, take the term before and multiply by a half. Okay, for the next one, I have determine whether each of these functions is even, odd, or neither, and then justify. So f of x is sine 2x, g of x is f of x plus 1, and h of x is shown on the graph. So let's actually start with h of x because I can see that graph. So let's look at this. And when I'm talking about even, odd, or neither, I'm talking about the symmetry. So notice that I have a line of symmetry here on the x-axis, or I'm sorry, the y-axis. Because of that, I could say that h of x is even because it is symmetric over the y-axis. Now, for f of x, I'm just going to look at that graph and I'll sketch it for you here. F of x is going to look like this, sort of. You could look at it on your calculator. And that's not symmetric over the y-axis, but if you spun it upside down, so if you actually took this and spun it upside down, which is going to take me 2 rounds to do here, notice that it looks exactly the same. And so that tells me that f of x is odd because it is symmetric about the origin. Now, for f of x plus 1, this is going to shift up 1 for f of x plus 1. So instead of being this graph that I have here, it's going to look like this graph just shifted up 1. So same sort of graph, but again, shifted up. So if I take this and spin this 180 degrees, so let me actually spin this upside down. Notice now this doesn't look the same anymore. Previously, this was up here, and now it's moved down. So g of x is neither, and your explanation would be because it is not symmetric over the y-axis or the origin. Okay, next one. Forever 21 is conducting a consumer satisfaction survey. Which method is most likely to lead to a bias sample? So again, we're determining here what would lead to a bias sample. So interviewing every 5th customer to come to the store. That's pretty random. It's people that shop at the store. It misses people that shop online, but it's not terrible. B, interviewing customers chosen at random by a computer at checkout. Anytime you see at random, it's pretty fair. Obviously, this does only get people that actually checked out, but those are your customers. C, interviewing customers who call an 800 number posted. That is definitely biased because you're only calling an 800 number if you're either getting an incentive or if you had bad service, right? So that's going to skew your data a little bit. And then interviewing every customer who comes to the store, random out of a hat, again, that's okay. Okay, Next one, in 1999, 1.4 million students took the ELA portion of the SAT. The mean, median, and standard deviation were calculated to be those three numbers respectively. Respectively meaning in that order. Determine an interval that represents 95% of them. So 95% should make you think your mean, right? Your mean plus or minus 2 times your standard deviation. So I know that my mean is 512. And I'm going to do plus or minus 2 times my standard deviation and do 14. All right, determine an equation for f if we're given f inverse. Well, the good news is they're inverses of each other, right? So the procedure that we know to find an inverse still works here. So let's switch our x and y. So x equals negative 3/4 y plus 2. I'm going to subtract 2 over negative 3/4 y. And then I'm going to multiply by the reciprocal to get these to cancel out. So this gives me that y equals negative 4/3 x plus 8/3. And again, there's other ways you can do that, but that's just distributing that up there. So I'm going to rewrite that as f of x equals negative 4x over 3 plus 8 over 3. All right, 15. Runner is using a 9-week training app to prepare for a race. The table shows the amount the program completed and the distance covered in a session, D in miles. Based on this, write an exponential regression equation. That should automatically make you think calculator. So remember, we're going to go to Stat, Edit. We're going to put these values in, and then we're going to go to Stat, Calc, and we're going to choose exponential regression. And that's going to tell me y equals a, b to the x. A, it tells me, is 1.223034549. B equals 2.652024589. Now I want this rounded to the nearest thousandth, so it's going to be y equals 1.223 times 2.652 to the x, just putting in a and b there. So for the next one, a student is chosen at random from the student body. The probability that they select art as their favorite is 0.27. The probability that they are a sophomore is 0.283. If the probability a student selected is a sophomore or chooses art is 0.45, what is the probability that a student selected is a sophomore whose favorite subject is art? So that's the probability that you are, choosing art and you're a sophomore. So let's see what we know. We know probability that they chose art is 0.27. Probability that they are a sophomore was 0.283. Probability that they were a sophomore and they chose art was 0.45. And I want to know what's the probability, this is or, and I want to know what's the probability that they're a sophomore and they chose art. Remember, you can tell this is and because you could make that an A if you connected them, right? So that's and there. Okay, so let's figure out what we know. We've got 4 things here, right? We've got 1 that we know, or 3 that we know, and 1 that we don't. And anytime you see an or, you should start to think, ooh, there might be an overlap here. So the thing that you need to know here is that the probability of S or A is equal to the probability of S plus the probability of A minus the overlap, which is the probability of S and A. So remember, there can be an overlap here. So this is going to be 0.45, 0.27, 0.283, and my unknown. Solving, combining like terms, subtracting, you're going to get that equals 0.10. So the probability there that a student is a sophomore and likes art is 0.1. Notice I didn't say 10%, it's 0.1. Now the question is, are these independent of each other? Well, let's look at that. So if they were independent, then the probability that they're a sophomore and they like art should equal the probability that they're a sophomore times the probability that they like art, right? That's my test for independence. So this I know is 0.1. This one is 0.283. This one I know is 0.27. And I want to know if those are equal. Notice that when you multiply them, they are not equal. And so I could say that means they are not independent. Because remember that that's a test for independence. And so if it fails it, that means they're not independent. Now, Here, the thing I want you to remember is that this says justify, not explain. Justify just means show your work. Okay, next one. The set of data in the table shows the results of a survey. Excuse me. On the number of messages people send each month in different age groups. If a person from this survey is selected at random, what is the probability that they are between the ages of 23 and 60? So let's look at this. Being between the ages of 23 and 60 means you are in one of these groups, right? And if you add all of those up, you're going to get 229. Now we need to know the total. So for the total, we can just find our column totals here. So if we add this number, and that together, that's going to give me that my total is going to be 456. So the probability of being between 26 and 30 is 229 out of 456. My best advice to you when you get a problem like this is to really just sit there and say, okay, let me find all the totals first and then go from there. All right, next one. Determine the shifts from 3 sine x to this function. Now notice you're already starting with the 3 there. So that 3, you don't need to worry about. It's not a shift. It is already in the original function. So let's start with this one. X plus pi over 3. Well, that's inside, and so remember HIVO. If it's inside, it's horizontal, and it always goes the opposite direction. So this is going to go left pi over 3. And then this one is outside, so that's vertical. And so that's going to go down 5. Again, we're just determining things here. All right, next one. 20 says, given f of 9 is -2, write a formula that can be used to generate this sequence. So let's start by trying to figure out whether this is arithmetic or geometric. So going from here to here, that is going to increase by 0.75. And going from there to there, oh my goodness, it does the same thing. And going from there to there, oh my goodness, it does the same thing. So that's steadily increasing by the same amount. So this is going to be arithmetic. Now, it says write a formula. It doesn't say what type of formula. So let's start with if we wanted an explicit formula. If they want an explicit formula, you can use the formula on your formula sheet for AN. So AN is going to be your first term, which is -8, plus n minus 1 times the common difference, which is 0.75. So that right there would be one option. That's your explicit formula. Your recursive formula here, well, we need A1, which is -8. And then AN, we would take the term before it, AN minus 1, and add 0.75 to that. So either of those are good options. It didn't specify what you need, but that would be what I would do there. Okay, next one. The hours of daylight in Albany from January 1st can be modeled by this equation. How many hours of daylight to the nearest 10th does this model predict for February 3rd? So this is really just giving you an input, but we need to know how many days that is. So 30 days from January 1st to January 3rd, we're going to assume that that is number of days, 33, right? We're going from the first of a month to the third of the next month. So let's say that that is 33. Remember that when you use any sort of trig graphing on your calculator, you should be using radian mode. So I'm just going to take that 33 and plug it in there. And so that gives me 9.670 ... I wanted it to the nearest 10th, and so that's going to be 9.7 hours. All right, the next one. Given A and B, probability of A equals 0.6, probability of B equals 0.5, probability of A or B is 0.8. What are A and B independent? So we're determining if these are independent. So to find that, I need to know probability of A and B, and I want to see if that equals probability of A times probability of B. Now the issue I see here is I don't know that. So I know that these are 0.6 and 0.5, but I don't know the probability of A and B. So let's figure that out. We know the OR, so using that formula from before, probability of A or B, will be probability of A plus probability of B minus probability of A and B, or the overlap. And so solving for that, I get that x equals 0.3. Now, if I plug this in here, right, plug that in there, oh my goodness, a miracle occurs. 0.3 does equal 0.3, and so that means these are independent, right? It's a test for independence. Okay, 23 is the exact same thing. It gives you the probability of one, probability of the other, probability of or, asks you for and, so you would do the same exact thing with that formula. All right, next one, write the recursive sequence a1 equals 6, an equals 3 times an minus 1 as an explicit formula. So first let's find a couple terms in this sequence because sometimes it's hard to figure out. So I know a1 is 6, and then I know to get the next term, I'm going to do 3 times the term before it. So this would be 18, and then 3 times 18, which is 54, and then so on and so on and so on. And so I can see here, based on this recursive, that the pattern is times 3, and that means this is geometric. So to get the explicit formula, I'm just going to use my an formula from my formula sheet. So it's going to be a1 times the ratio to the n minus 1. Okay, let's look at this next one, determining the max and min height. So here what they give us is a Ferris wheel takes 7 minutes to make one full rotation. The height is given by this function where t is time in minutes. Determine the min and max height. Now I know you can just look at this on your calculator, but let's actually think about this graph. So let's start with what we know. We know that this is our amplitude, 70. This is our midline. And the length of the wave doesn't really matter for the height. We just need to know where the middle, top, and bottom are. So if the middle is at 80, and then the amplitude is how far up and how far down you go. So we'd go up 70 and down 70. And so my max here is going to be at 150, and my min here is going to be at 10. So that's what I would say. My maximum height is at 150. Does it give me units? Feet. And the min is at 10 feet. And again, you could look at your calculator and check those, do second calc min or second calc max, but same thing. Okay, next one, results of a survey are shown in the table. Determine if the events student is female and student prefers drama are independent. So we've done a bunch of these, but I want to do one more because independence tests come up a lot. So probability that a student is female, probability that a student prefers drama, and then let's do probability that a female, or they're female and they prefer drama, right? So that's what I need. So probability that they are female, well, there are 260 females out of 490 total. Probability that they prefer drama is 135 out of 490 total. And remember, these are probabilities, so they better be fractions. And then probability that both occur, so females that prefer drama, is 70 out of 490. And so my question here is, does 70 out of 490 equal 260 out of 490 times 135 out of 490? And remember, I want to know, are these equal, right? So there's my question mark. It turns out that they are not. And so because of that, I can say that these are not independent. And again, it only asks me to justify, not explain, so showing your work is justification. All right, couple more. So Alex earns $52,000 in her first year of teaching and earns 1.2% increase in each successive year. Write a geometric series formula to represent Alex's total earnings after n years. And then it says to use that formula. So they were really nice here, and they told you what formula to use. This is on your formula sheet. So this is the sum of n terms, which would be a1 minus a1r to the n over 1 minus r. Now, let's plug in what we know. So a1 is 52,000 minus 52,000 times, now it's growing here, so it's 1.012, right? Exponential growth to the n all over 1 minus 1.012. So think about that when you're thinking about your ratio, that it's growing, so it's got to be bigger than 1. Now, it says use that formula to find our earning after 10 years. So all I would do is plug 10 in, into there, and I will tell you that comes out to be $548,000. $997. And I think it was 70 cents. Okay, last couple questions. The lifespan of a 40-watt bulb produced by a company is normally distributed with a mean and a standard deviation. 40-watt bulb is produced and selected at random. What is the probability that it will be between these two numbers? So I am going to think about my normal curve, and I know I want it to be between 1391 and 1417, and I want it to be right in there. So I'm going to go in my calculator, put in my lower bound as this, upper bound as that, and then your mean and your standard deviation. And that comes out to be 8610706, and the nearest 10,000th would be 8611. If you need a refresher on how to do that in your calculator, go back to my video about calculator use, and there's one in there. All right, same thing for 29. So we're looking for people that are between 64 and 69.5 inches. Again, it will be the same exact thing. I'm not going to do another one of those because I think we're pretty good at those. All right, and then the last one, Jazz decides to put $1,000 in a savings account. It is going to be compounded monthly. So pays 3% compounded monthly. Determine how much money she will have after 1 year. So compounded monthly, we're going to use y equals p 1 plus, because it's growth, r over n to the nt. So this will be her initial, 1 plus 0.03 over 12 to the 12 times 1 year, and that comes out to be $1,030.42. Okay, so that about does it for different things that they could ask you to determine. If you still have questions on these, please let me know. But again, we're doing mixed up review, so you're getting exposure to everything, and your brain gets used to thinking back and forth between these topics. And I will see you guys in our next live stream.